Button up here. Log in. They have multiple logins. I'm just going to say use Hardy Hardy. Be patient with the keyboard. Hardy Hardy, get you there, admin, everything is available. Start to love your home screen. If you see a screen like this, there's an invisible button here. If you see a screen like this, that just means you push that button, they all close. First things first, this next button here is like your settings button. First thing, select your recipe. Pick one. Recipe number 1, select it, and we're going to edit it. Set your target weight. I got a couple items here, about 60 grams, something like that. You're going to want to use the target weight that they're going to want to read, period. I think they're doing 45 pounds. I'm going to go 55 here. The 45 pounds and 55 is going to mess up the cut. The target weight, I believe you guys are going to be weighing about 45 pounds. I'm going to use 55 for my test because I'm using a different weight. But the target weight is important because everything else is going to be set around that. Your unit UPMs, units per minute, how many they're going to be running. I think you guys are going to be running about 20. Product length, I believe they're somewhere around 2 feet, 24 inches. Your belt speed, it's going to be dependent on their drives. For this test, I'm going to do about 20% here. You can run it up to 100%. And we're just going to move across the bottom here. So next button's parameter main. How many decimal points you want? I'm going to use 1. Graduations, 1s, 10s, 5s, you know how that works. Waver saver, commonly 3.5 hertz. Number of averages, commonly 10. It's really dependent, but those should get you there pretty close. I'm going to leave my units to grams, but you'll want to change them to probably to pounds or however, whatever unit of measure they're using. I'm going to go back to grams here. Check zero mode and auto zero mode. We leave those on for most intents purposes of what you're going to be using. Your auto zero tolerance, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but how many pounds you'll allow it to auto zero off. I would think they would be somewhere around 0.1 tenth of a pound. Then I'm gonna move up here. Variation threshold, motion threshold. Those are filters. For right now, we're going to take them down to 0.001. And that's going to be just like our baseline. We're going to come back to those. Zero tolerance, how much they're allowed to zero off. Let's say it's a pound. Motion tolerance, how much until it's in motion, say 2. And like I said, we're going to keep moving across here. Zones. Like I said, I believe you guys are going to be about 45. For me, I'm going to go 55. I suggest setting up all the zones. 55 to 60 is what I'm going to be using. 45 to 50. Like I said, I suggest setting up all the zones so the unit doesn't try to reject or count in 2 separate zones. They'll auto-populate for you. And commonly you'll have the rejects turned on if it's lower. Let's see if we'll go back. So as you can see, low fail below 45, low pass 45 up to 55, pass 55 to 60, high pass. So it all makes sense in 5 zones. Rejects on or off. These high fail stops, unless you wanted to stop when a weight hits a high fail or something like that, make sure they're off. Trigger settings. Your check delay. Are you familiar with that? How long it takes after the trigger before it starts actually taking weight measurements. I believe you're running fairly slow, so it might be about 2 seconds. For me, I'm actually going to take it down to 1 second. Check time, how long you're going to be weighing it. For you, it might be half a second. I'm going to do about 200 milliseconds. check hold, how long it's displayed on the screen. I would suggest probably around 0.3 of a second. Check mode. They're going to be using Photo Eye. You don't necessarily have to, but Photo Eyes will catch the bags that are empty. So let's go to the one Photo Eye mode. Check override. We're just going to leave that 100% for you and me. Tamper threshold here, 1. The explanations of these are all in the parameter help, page 1 and 2. But for the most part, we're just going to leave those two to 100% and 1. Reject delay. So it's important that the reject delay is longer than the sum of these 3 times. So you got 1200 milliseconds plus 1500 milliseconds. I'd say about 2 seconds reject delay. Yours is going to vary. It will need to be longer than your times here. So you may be up into the 5-second range, something like that. It's no big deal. Whenever this starts counting, it's going to finish, and whatever weight it has is going to either reject or pass. So if you don't have a weight, if you haven't gone along this time and gotten a weight, it's going to be 0, so it's going to kick it off. So I was talking about in the email. I'll go back down to 3 seconds here. How long the reject is going to kick? 2 seconds. Dynamic offset, that's their tare. And okay, so your dynamic offset is going to be your tare weight. We'll take a weight reading and come back to that. The high threshold is when you actually say, hey, I have a product on the scale. That's going to be probably in your case, maybe 30 pounds. It's up to you, totally application dependent. Low threshold, this is going to be a number pretty low, usually somewhere around like maybe 1/10 of a pound for you. It's going to actually start zeroing below that. It's going to start zeroing the check weight. So that's also application dependent. 0.1 to 1 pounds would be a very typical setting for that. So any changes you make, they're basically stored in a register, and they're not applied or saved or anything. They're just in space. When we hit apply, you have a choice to save it to the recipe or run the recipe and not save it. Typically, you will save and run, but if you're running a product at that time and you just want to change your recipe, just save it. Okay, so let's go over to calibration. After setting all those settings, you'll get very used to these 2 buttons up here. Calibration, C2 cal. It'll give you the status word and everything right here, and it even mentions manual page 121. This one calibrates fairly fast. Yours may take a little bit longer. Once we're calibrated down to 0, we're going to go back to our recipe. We're going to select it. Make sure we got the same one selected. We're going to go back to editing it. We're going to move across the parameters again. Remember I said we're going to come back to variation and motion threshold? Okay, so we're going to start the belts. And we're going to check the noise that we have on the belts. I had weight on it. Let me calibrate one more time. Okay. Select it. Probably cut that part out. Probably near the end of all your videos, there's going to be a screw up like that, and just cut the last like 5 seconds off. Yeah, filming.
Yeah, I can cut that out too.
Okay. So back to variation motion threshold. So now we're going to want to start the belts and see what kind of noise we have. We're going to watch our live weight. Yours may not move very much. Since you're going to be weighing pounds and 1/10 of a pound, at that point you can actually take the decimal points and increase the number of decimal points and see what noise you're really getting. We're moving pretty fast because we're measuring in grams here, but you can see from the negative to the positive number, we're getting about 3 grams. So the variation threshold, as it says in the manual, is about 1.5 times that. So 4.5 grams is what you would set it to. or 4.5. It depends on your amount of variation, but it's 1.5 times that amount of variation on your live weight while you're running. The motion threshold will be a third of that amount. So that was about 3 grams, so we're just going to go 1. Save and run. You should see the noise come down to a pretty considerably lower number, min to max. We got about 2 grams, something like that. Grams are pretty tough. So now that everything is saved to there, see if there's anything else. Our dynamic offset. So I would stop our belts, and let's say we have a bag that weighs a pound. I don't really know. Put the weight on there. Let's say it's, well, I'll do a little bit more weight on there. 29 grams. That's our bag, that's our tare. You just enter 29 in there. Once again, save and run. Next up, after everything's saved and run there, the diagnostic screen. It's the third button over. This is where you're going to see all the weight readings and triggers going up and down. So we want to start our belts and run something across. And you'll see everything trigger. Your weight reading's going up and down because my fingers are touching the scale. If you want to watch the weights that are coming through, a little bit bigger. About 33 grams. If I stop the belt, one of these is 29. 31.8. 32, that's probably the 33 gram going across. And you'll see the counts accumulate here. If you ever have any issues not counting, stop and restart the belts. There's a reset involved in that process. Speed changes, they'll require a timing change, and we didn't actually go over a timing change. Let's back up and do a timing change here. Back to diagnostics. There's your check delay and check time. If your times are just way off, you're moving too fast, too slow, let it clear. Triggered, check delay, check times. Let's say you think that's too much or too little, trying to capture that weight reading. Let's do it again. Let's say this is way beyond your weight trace, which is that yellow line. Let's say the green is your check time. Let's say that's way beyond one end or the other, where your check delay, which is the orange line, is beyond one end or the other of this yellow weight trace. You want to adjust the check delay and check time. And go back to the parameters, trigger settings, check delay and check time. Let's say you want to change it to, let's say 200 milliseconds instead. Save and run. Go back to your diagnostics and do it again. That's how you would adjust it. It shortens up the check delay, check time. That graph is not perfect. We're limited to the HMI speed. However, it's a good show of how many times you've flagged the trigger. Shows your check delay, orange, and your check time, green. The captured weight is the white. Just shows that that's your check hold time. 3 milliseconds. I'm getting a bunch of low fails. So at the end of the last video, stuck some weight on there. It's weighing really light, 35 grams. I know these are about 60 together. We're getting a bunch of low fails. What I noticed is I did a tear amount that was reducing the weight down below acceptable level here. So I came back, selected the product, the dynamic offset. So I put half my weight into the dynamic offset. Really, what you're going to end up doing is putting your bag weight, which is probably a pound, something along those lines. If we go back to the home, you'll see we're going to get a really high weight because we're 62 grams. Our target set point is 55 grams. So we're actually well above our target set point because I only put one pound or 1 gram for the tear weight. If I take the tear weight back to a realistic number, I'd say 10 grams, something like that, to bring us back down into the usable ranges just for this experiment. You'll see our old weight, and you'll see our new weight. So that tear amount affects a lot. It was affecting us really high, or really low, really high, and it'll bring you right into your target set point range when it's set correctly. I want to do something on the config menu of the machine. There's a couple little settings. Machine configuration. So the indicator on time, that's how long the stack light is going to stay on. PE block timer, that's how long that PE, that photo eye, is allowed to be blocked before it sets an alarm. And all alarms can be reset and closed. Okay, so here's an example of some timing that is just too long outside the weight trace. You'll see the yellow weight trace. You'll see that your check delay is really long and your check time is really long. Your weight's on and off before you even start checking that weight. A couple examples. So you're going to get some crazy check weights, probably very low. Check weight should show up there, -5 pounds. To adjust this the fastest way, we want to take that check delay down, probably about 10% of what it was, something like that, 100 milliseconds. And our check time, we'll just do 500 milliseconds, just to reduce everything and back it up a little bit. And those two, apply edits, you can go back. So you go back and forth between those screens to get the check weight within the weight trace plateau. You can see we're still not centered. Maybe increase our check delay, probably maybe double what that was. You saw it was a good second. Now we took it down to 100 milliseconds. Now we're going to stretch it out to 200 milliseconds. You get used to doing this, going back and forth. You can see it's a little bit better, but that's actually about perfect. The weight trace comes up, our check delay ends, we start timing right when the weight is fairly stable, we stop timing before it drops off.